our energy consumption, and not in 10 years, in the next 2-3 years. If we don't manage to stabilize our energy consumption, what will happen is that we won't have enough, let's say, grid energy usable to meet the energy demand, and therefore the energy mix will not evolve quickly enough towards a more decarbonized mix. Okay, so it's a very important conclusion, because it shows that if we are serious with the fact of fighting climate change, then we have to organize so that our energy consumption gets reduced. And it is on a worldwide basis. That means that we can assume that developing countries will still see their energy consumption increase, which means that developed countries should reduce their energy consumption and significantly, let's say, in the next 10 to 20 years. And that's true for digital as for any other sectors, and that's why in what I'm going to present, I will speak not only about GHG emissions, but also a lot about energy. So, having that in mind, what can we say about the magnitude and the evolution of the digital environment footprint and digital energy consumption? First thing which is striking is that digital GHG emissions, let's say, are already significant. In 2019, they are probably close to 4% of the global emissions. So, of course, 4% is not 20%, but 4% is already more than the civil aviation air traffic is generated. And second conclusion is that not only these GHG emissions are significant, but they are growing quite fast. The growth rate, compounded and growth rate, is in the range of 8%. And if you remember right, plus 8% has to be compared with minus 6%, which should be the benchmark for any sector. So clearly, the evolution of digital GHG emissions are actually not what they should be, according to what we have to do if we want to remain under the 2 degrees bar. And third conclusion is that if we continue, let's say, in a business as usual mode, that means if the digital ecosystem works in the same way in the next 5 years as in the past 10 years, then that means it is very likely that in 2025, digital GHG emissions will be as important as the car industry. So what I think what has to be taken from this slide is first that it's very surprising, because when we use digital, we have no way actually to guess that the situation is like this, because it doesn't seem it seems to be, let's say, a clean industry, and it seems to be a clean service. But actually, the emissions are quite significant. And what is more worrying is that they are growing and fast. If we look at the energy consumption, we have the same type of evolution. That means the digital energy consumption is growing at about 9% per year, and has been like that in the past 5 years. And if nothing changes, it will be like that in the next 5 years. When we focus on energy consumption, we should have in mind that it is energy consumed when we use digital equipments and services, but it is also the energy consumed when we have to build the equipments that then will serve as platform for services. Okay. There are several colors on the graph, so I don't really have time to comment them in details, but maybe there will be some questions about that. But basically, there is let's say, an additional factor that we have to take into account for the next 5 to 10 years, is the fact that in the past 10 years, we've been facing huge energy efficiency progress by applying new technologies and so on, which means that to have, let's say, the same service every year, we were needing less energy to produce it. But this energy efficiency progress is slowing down at the moment. And that means that if our, let's say, consumption level and trend is not changing, there is a risk that energy consumption increases even faster in the next 5 years than in the past 10 years. And that's why you have different colors to illustrate some kind of sensitivity analysis. Now, I was stressing on the fact that digital energy consumptions encompasses both energy necessary to use services, but also to build equipment. And actually, the latter part is quite significant. About half of the final energy used in the digital world, let's say, is used to build the equipment. And you can see on the chart that also most of the energy used during the production of the equipment has to do with consumer equipment. Especially TV sets, smartphones, and a number of digital devices. And there are new categories of digital devices almost every year. The other comment that is worth making, looking at this graph, is that if you look at the use phase, you basically have a three-tier picture. One third of the energy is used by data centers, 1/3 by networks, and 1/3 by the equipments, the terminals that we use both at home or in the business life. That means that there is no single, let's say, main source of energy consumption. I'm saying that because relatively often there is a focus on data centers, and that's quite important. But networks and terminals are as important as the data centers in the use phase. So why do we have this huge increase in both energy consumption and GHG emissions? First, if you look at the use phase, and if you look at the network, we can say that the network traffic, the internet traffic, if you want, has been increasing at a pace which is close to 30% a year. And 80% actually of this growth comes from video services. Video services have a growth which is even higher, and video services come from different sources. It could be the fact of watching a film on Netflix using a streaming platform, but it could be also watching a short video when going to a website. Very often now on the front page, there is a short video that you are more or less actually forced to watch if you want to continue to the content of the website. And even though this video is quite short, they are very, very, very numerous. And the fact that there is such a widespread use, let's say, of videos in our daily world causes this huge increase of network traffic. One thing I should add also on video is that, of course, there's a limit in the time we can use every day with watching videos. So that should be a factor that in the long term could cap this growth. But this doesn't account for the fact that every 3 years, a new standard is coming up that is providing us with richer content. So we switch from standard video to high definition video to ultra high definition video, and then ultra high definition 4K, and then we have the 8K. And each time we switch from one standard to the next one, we more or less multiply by 3 the volume of traffic that the same video is going to generate. If we look at data center, more or less it's the same story, but with the fact that the traffic is even higher. Why? Because not only the data brought to the data center by the network are growing, but also we have more and more computation needs applied to this data, and this generates additional traffic within the data center. On the same picture, you also have the evolution of the volume of data stored in the data centers, and you can see that it's growing even higher. And I'm not showing the part of the data stored which are related to big data, which grow at a pace close to 50% a year. So both on data center and network, we have explosive growth, let's say. What is happening is actually that the problem is not so much that the traffic is growing, because it's kind of a normal trend. The problem is that it's growing too fast compared to the energy efficiency progress we have been able to do in the past 10 years. And as I said, very likely than what we'll be able to achieve in the next 10 years. part of these, let's say 34%, is absorbed by energy efficiency dynamics, but only a part of it, and that's why the energy consumption is growing. Now, if we look at the equipment part, at the terminals part, we have not at the same pace, but we have the same trend. You have in front of you actually the volume of sales of digital devices on a yearly basis between 2010 and 2030. And even if it doesn't look like it, it's a relatively conservative view, which means that if I were using other sources, it could be even higher. But let's focus on this picture. What it shows is that only 10 years from now, we were producing about 1 billion digital devices every year. Already a lot. But at the moment, we're producing more or less 4 billion digital devices every year. It's with multiplied by 4 in 10 years. And if things, let's say, continue as planned, then we will be producing close to 10 billion devices in 10 years. As you remember, about 50% of the energy consumed in the digital world is consumed at the stage of production. So you can see, of course, if we continue along this trend, then the production energy consumption is bound to increase and to increase a lot. One additional comment is that at the moment, there are probably around 15 billion digital devices in the world, which means there are more or less 2 digital devices per person. Of course, it's a worldwide average, which is completely theoretical. But if these predictions are true, then we would have close to 6 digital devices per person in 10 years. Okay. Again, I don't have time to show that, but let's remember that this ratio of 2 digital devices per person is actually more in the range of 13 or 15 in the United States, and less than 1 in developing countries which have internet access. I'm not even talking, of course, about the part of the population which doesn't have internet access. So what I mean by that is that our consumption habits actually have a very huge impact on the energy consumption coming from the production of digital devices. And last comment is that the next 10 years should be the years of the Internet of Things. That's the orange part of the graph. This Internet of Things will need a lot of actually very small digital modules. But the fact that each of them will be small doesn't mean that you don't need energy to produce it. And 2, as I said, they will be small, but they will be very numerous. And again, we have this volume, let's say, dimension that we should be looking at, because it's the main actually cause behind the digital energy consumption increase. Now, to make it even, let's say, a bit more complex, I said in the past 10 minutes that a part of the volume has been absorbed by energy efficiency progress, which is true. Now, what is very tricky is that our natural trend, and it's a historical trend, it's a socio-dynamic trend, it's a psychological trend, whatever. But what is happening in the digital world is, as in other parts of the economy, is what is called the rebound effect. What is the rebound effect? It is the induction of additional demand by increasing the efficiency of a production or consumption process. What does that mean? That means that when we find a way to reduce the cost or the effort which has to be borne when you want to use a resource, we're going to leverage actually this progress by creating more, let's say, so much more additional consumption that the final result is going that we will be using more energy than before. So one example, very simplistic, but the figures are relatively true. They're illustrative, but relatively true. Let's compare 2 years, 2018, 2019, and let's look at how much energy we need to use in order, let's say, to process 1 gigabyte of data. We are going to change some equipment between 2018 and 2019. We are going to improve the air conditioning system. We are going to improve the way we use servers, which means that the use rate of servers is going to increase and the efficiency is going to improve. Okay, so we are going to have, let's say, a 15% gain in terms of energy efficiency in 1 year. But in parallel, we're going to have one user that was using 1 gigabyte of data in 2018, and because of additional services and because of, for instance, the increase of quality standard in the videos he's going to watch, actually, when doing the same thing, the same user is going to use 30% more data. And the result, and it's only arithmetic, is that ultimately, the energy which is going to consume by this user in the data center is going to increase by 10%. Okay, that really the time of mechanism that is at work, not only at the moment, but has been at work in the digital ecosystem since the beginning, and that is one main explanation, let's say, of the digital dynamics we are facing. So that means that even if we, by magic, we were finding some technology that would increase very significantly the energy efficiency, then it is very likely also that if we do not change the way we think and the way we live, we would use actually this energy efficiency progress to generate even more volume, and we will not achieve the results we were striving for. Okay. So adding all of these factors in mind, our conclusion in 2018 was that the digital environmental footprint evolution is actually a design issue, and we have to address it like that, and therefore come up with design solutions. So what do we mean by that? I think what comes from the slides I've been presenting is that the trend which is currently at work in terms of digital consumption is not sustainable. Okay. The second conclusion we have is that energy efficiency progress is likely to slow down in the next 10 years. And even though there are some promising technologies, let's say, being worked out in labs, it will not be industrialized at a huge scale before the end of these 10 years. So we cannot rely on some technology huge progress to solve the problem. So that means that the only way to solve the problem is to find a way to reduce the growth of the digital volumes generated by our digital activities. Okay, and we will achieve that probably not only by looking at how we engineer the services we are going to use, but also we will have to make sure that we prioritize new digital transition projects, and the way to prioritize them, one way to prioritize them, is going to be able to assess their contribution to sustainability. Their direct contribution, but also their indirect contribution. So that's what we should be doing, okay? But it is not very simple. Why? Because when we try to understand what are the factors which have brought us to this, let's say, to ways, let's say, of using digital, which are completely adverse to sobriety. All of this is a result of societal and economic behaviors. First of all, we are quite unaware of the impacts of overusage of digital. And also there are some things in our minds which makes us quite digitally angry. So our natural trend is what we've been observing in the past 10 years. If we look at other types of factors, such as enterprises, in the past 10 years, enterprises have engaged into digital transitions. And this has been done without, let's say, looking at the impacts on their abilities to engage into environmental transitions. And therefore, as these, let's say, additional constraint or this additional objective has not been taken into account when defining this digital transition, it's quite normal that they do not lead to any progress in terms of overall environmental footprint. In parallel, digital has been seen as one of the main opportunities to generate additional economic growth, or to come back to higher economic growth, and therefore there has been, and it's been natural, I must say, a lot of initiatives meant to encourage development of digital devices and services. But there's not been any particular concern about the environmental consequences. Fourth factor, and it's probably, I hope we'll have some question on that later on, is that having been in the digital world for more than 30 years, I can say that the past 10 years have not been completely similar to what was happening before. The fact that some specific players, platform operators, GAFAM, have developed so much is, in my opinion, quite related to this evolution of the digital environmental footprint. Why? Because basically their business models need actually this very high increase of volumes, and we know they are using what is called addictive design techniques that are actually not only helping, but really driving us to the type of behaviors we've been observing. And last but not least, and there's been some public talks about that in the past years. We know that there is some kind of what Lawrence Hilty called software-induced obsolescence, which is actually boosting hardware production, is also one cause of the high volume of digital devices that have to be produced every year, just to provide us with a way to continue having the same usage. We need to change our devices, we need to change our smartphones, and probably if we were managing software evolutions in another way, we would not be forced to change these smartphones as often as we do. So if we want to summarize the forces at work and have a system view actually of the issue, we have different players which are interacting through digital services and flows of digital equipments, and they are doing so in a system which has some rules which have been defined either by the players themselves or by the regulators. And we have also some kind of governance of this interaction, which are there to encourage some behaviors and to dissuade other behaviors. And so what I mean is that if we think that the digital environmental footprint issue is a system issue, then we have to look at ways on how to change the different parts of the system, the way they work, in order to have the system behaviors change. And beside and above, I would say, the system itself, there are two things which are quite important. There are a set of beliefs that we have regarding digital, and one of them is that, let's say, digital is naturally good for the environment, and we've seen that it is not so. It could be, of course, a way to help the environmental transition, but it's not going to happen naturally. So that's for the beliefs. And then we, on the right side, we even have some values that we try to achieve, that we try to respect, and there is an open question about the fact about where should about the fact that some of these values might be facilitating or not actually the evolution of the system towards a way of working that will be more compatible with the environmental constraints. So to be more pragmatic, and that's going to be almost my last slide, what type of solutions can we have in mind? As I said, if we want the system to change, we have to think of actions that will be directed towards the different players of the system in a consistent way. What I mean is that it is not enough on an individual basis to change our consumption habits. First, it's going to be very hard because the rest of the system is going to still work in another way as we want it to work. And two, the impact of our individual action is going to be too small to be, let's say, to be effective. One thing we should be acting on is the set of beliefs we have regarding digital and the environment. And that's what we've been trying to do in the SHIP project in the past 3 years. So to inform and to influence consumers through media, and then it's going to be also the responsibility of the governments to come up with some public policies and public communication campaigns that will create this awareness. Another set of actors are enterprises and public companies or public administrations, and to provide them with tools to come up with what I call augmented digital transitions. That means digital transitions that will, let's say, encompass the objective of contributing to the environmental transition. One very important thing, especially as I'm speaking today to a European audience, is that if we want to, let's say, have an influence on the supply part of the problem, that means basically digital suppliers and especially GAFAM. Probably one way we have to go is to use some market power, but only it will be effective only if it is being done on a European basis. And what that means? That means probably establishing a set of rules that will help or force, depending on how you want to look at it, the digital players to change their not only product services, but also probably the business models to make them compatible with digital sustainability. And last but not least, we have to have tools, actually, that help us to conduct these different type of assessments, evaluation, and so on. I must say that they are not really existing at the moment. And there should be some research and development addressing that if we want to be effective, because it's relatively complex, and very often the solution is not really intuitive. So basically, that's what we've been trying to contribute to doing with this new report called "How to Implement Digital Sobriety." And in this report, we've been trying to address three different things, or we have been trying to, let's say, to bring content to three different types of players. One is the government, trying to explain what are the psychological drivers that work behind digital consumption, how they are being used by digital players, and how they could be understood in order to come up with public policies that would help influence the behaviors in the environmentally right way. Second type of players we've been addressing are the enterprises, or any, let's say, any organization which has an information system and has been engaging in digital transition. And there we've come up with a methodological framework that shows how to embed, actually, the digital sobriety imperatives into a corporate decision framework. That means that we think that building tools that would be used beside, let's say, the decision framework at work within companies will not work. We have to find ways to make this inherent to this decision framework. And third thing we've been doing, and there we've been targeting especially local government, local authorities, which have been exposed to a lot of proposals for smart cities, smart mobility, smart a lot of things. And we've been trying to show that putting something smart doesn't make it smart, basically, and that we should be using some kind of rationality to assess whether these projects are bound to bring the environmental benefits that they are promising, or if by nature they are incapable of bringing them. So we are not saying there that digital cannot be a vehicle to facilitate environmental transition. We're just saying that it's not going to happen by nature, and that some of these projects are promising and they should be prioritized and conducted, but other projects are not, and they should be disregarded. For example, and that's going to be my last word, but we look at the smart lights, and it's very clear that smart lighting can bring a lot of benefits in a complex environment. But smart lights in one of two rooms in a residential home are not going to bring at all the environmental benefits they promise. So what is going to be important is to have some tools in order to make the right decisions. So I'm finished. It's been quite quick, so if I've not been clear on some topics, please do not hesitate to ask, and I will try to explain further. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hugues, for this excellent presentation. Lots of food for thought. And we have questions. So just to explain to everyone who would like to go back to some parts of this presentation, we have filmed this, and the video will be made available on the website, on the webpage of Connect University, so that you can go back and check if you need to. So let's pass on to the questions. Maybe I'll take a few ones if they can be batched. Okay, well, the first question was, are there any more recent figures than the 2015 ones? But this came in during, I suppose this refers to one of the graphs, but we are not sure which graph this refers to. So let me take another question. What do you think about the French Senate proposition for a law to reduce the environmental footprint of digital? Sufficient or not? Likely to be adopted? Okay. And then we have questions on data centers, so maybe we'll take that next. Okay. Data centers. 90% of energy consumption is data centers. If the cloud providers become more centralized, for example, AWS, MS, will it be better for the environment, i.e. economies of scale? And then there is a related question, any data on the implications of the move from centralized data centers to the edge? Okay, I'll pass these questions. We'll take the next questions later.
Okay, thank you. First, regarding the figures I've been using come from the 2018 report. So historical figures are until 2017. We're in the process of updating this scenario. And probably a new report is going to be released at the end of the year or at the beginning of next year. But basically, there is no reason to think that the trend we've been showing are significantly different. Why? Because there have been 2 or 3 studies conducted since we published this first report. And although they've been using different models, they reach about the same conclusion. That means 3% of GHG emissions at the moment, and an increase of between 6 to 8%. What do I think about the propositions put forward by the French Senate? Thanks for the question. Overall, I think that it's a very good initiative, and if you look at these propositions, there are about 25. They are trying actually to target the different sides of the issue, targeting both consumers, vendors, regulations, and so on. So I think overall it's a good approach. We'll see what will happen when it's going to be debated in the parliament. But overall, yes, we support these initiatives by the French Senate. And I would say we're pleased to see that things are going forward. When we started our work in 2017, it was not at all understood that there could be such an issue. And 3 years later, we see that there are some discussions coming up in the parliament. So it's a good result. But as I said, time is of the essence. What's going to be important is what we do or don't do in the next 10 years. So we have to see how these proposals transform into actions, and also we have to understand how things could evolve beyond France, because digital environmental footprint is a global issue. It's not only a local issue. Regarding the data center, so what is the let's say what is the impact of cloud providers? Is it positive or negative? So, not a simple answer to the question. So first of all, it is clear that the data centers which are operated by the large cloud providers are much more energy efficient than the average data center, or even the large data centers operated by private enterprises. So if that means that if you have the same workload in a hyper data center operated by a cloud provider, or in a traditional data center, you are going to use much less energy in these hyper data centers than in the traditional data center. So on this level, it is beneficial. Two, we have on this, as on a lot of other digital aspects, these rebound effects, which means that the business model of these cloud providers is there also to stimulate the growth of the volumes. And the question is whether the growth of the volumes is going to be so important that it is going to absorb actually whole or a part of the energy efficiency triggered by the switch to a hyper data center. Basically, it is not clear, let's say. Some people say, yes, no problem. Others say, sorry, but if we look at the overall picture, the data center energy consumption is still growing. Okay. And third, and that's thanks for the question. At the moment, what we have seen in the past 10 years is indeed a centralization of the computing power in very large, in hyper data centers. With the Internet of Things, with 5G, with other things, we might see an adverse evolution in the next 10 years. What I mean is that we are expecting now that computing power is going to be decentralized in what is called edge data centers. Why? In order to be able to process data closer to the place where the data are originated and closer to where the actions should be conducted. There are some technical issues such as latency that are going to push for this evolution. And if this happens, it is clear also that the energy efficiency in these edge data centers is not going to be as high as in the large data centers. So it could be a cause of additional energy consumption because of this evolution. Again, and so I'm answering in a qualitative way at the moment. We're trying to translate that into figures in the next report that we should be issuing early next year.
Thank you, Eugen. More questions. One refers to your points on reducing usage. Unlimited data access only to organizations and vital use. So telecom providers would cease to offer unlimited data to the layman. That's one question. And another question is on recycling. Any idea of the level of recycling of mobile phones by suppliers? Seems to me they claim to collect old phones and recycle, but the volume is still tiny, isn't it? Okay, we'll stop it there and then we'll take next questions.
I'm not sure I understood the first question, so I'm going to reformulate it. I understood that what do you think about the fact that telecom operators are now proposing unlimited data package with the mobile subscriptions? So if that is the question, I don't think it's a good evolution at all. It's going to let's say contribute to keeping the mobile traffic growth at the level it is, and the mobile traffic growth is close to 50% at the moment. And mobile traffic growth is the main cause, actually, of the additional energy consumption on the network part, and it's becoming actually like an important issue for the telecom operators, because it's increasing actually the energy costs. So unlimited data package is exactly what we should not be doing. Second question is on recycling, and especially of mobile phones. So let's try to be clear with words. Recycling can have two meanings. The first meaning is so my mobile phone is still working, but I don't want to use it. Okay. Or should I recycle it so that somebody else is going to use it, or how could something be repaired so that it can have a second life? Okay. So this let's say this second-hand phone market was really underdeveloped a few years ago. It is developing. It has been developing for years in the developing countries, but it is developing now as well in the developed countries. And it's a good evolution, because it means that actually the lifetime of the mobile phone is going to be longer than before, and therefore somewhere it is going to reduce the carbon footprint related to the production of this mobile phone. Okay. Now, even though it has a second life, it is not going to work forever. So at one point in time, it's not going to work anymore, and we have to decide what to do with it. So at the moment, unfortunately, most of these mobile phones, when they are not usable anymore, they get into what is called the gray market, and they are illegally exported out of Europe, and they end up into into places, basically in Africa or in Southeast Asia, where they are going to be burned and dismantled, but not really recycled. So the recycling rate, of my phone at the moment is extremely low. If you compare the amount of materials that you will be able to reuse, maybe it's in the range of a few percent. If your smartphone is 150 grams, maybe you're going to be reusing 5 or 6 grams of it. And there is also some technical issue behind that. That at the moment, to build a smartphone, you need about 70 different metals. And that means that each of these metals is present in the smartphone at very, very small concentrations. And explains why it would be, even if it is technically possible, it would be extremely energy intensive actually to technically recycle a lot of these metals. The only one which can be more or less recycled at the moment is gold, but all the others cannot be recycled with the current technologies. So it's thanks for the question, because it means that circular economy does not really work actually for this type of equipment.
Thank you. More questions? Any data on the energy associated with production of the network's components, of the passive network, active network, according to their material? Now that's a very, very specific question. And let's have a look at more. What does it mean? What do the acronyms GATAM and BATX stand for? And how do you foresee to educate the huge mass of consumers about digital sobriety?
Okay. So first question is indeed quite specific. If you look at the let's say two things. If you look at the energy consumption related to networks, you will see that the contribution of the infrastructure equipments, the production of infrastructure equipments, is relatively small. It's maybe a few percent of the total energy consumption. So it's quite different from the consumer part, where the production is dominant in terms of energy consumption compared to usage. But if you look at GHG emissions, then it depends on where you are, especially in Europe. If you are in a country where the electricity mix is quite decarbonized, such as France, then the impact of infrastructure equipment on GHG emission is not so small. Maybe 20 to 30% of the overall network GHG emissions. So that's the answer. Second question, what means GAFAM and BATX? GAFAM stands for Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple, and Microsoft. So basically, these US tech companies, which represent now 25% of the US stock market, and which are the dominant, let's say, digital players, at least in the western part of the world. And BATX are the equivalents actually in China. So it stands for Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent, and Xiaomi. Basically, these BATX are as big as the GAFAM, but their sphere of influence is more China and other Asian countries, rather than at the moment, rather than Europe and Americas. And the third question is, what is possible to educate consumers on digital sobriety? I think the first thing about that is to inform them on the consequences of their digital activities. At the moment, maybe only 5% of people have an idea that their digital, let's say, consumption habits have an environmental impact. So it could be done in the form of public communication campaigns, such as campaigns which are done on other subjects. But because if you compare digital and cars, it's clear that when you drive your car, then sometimes you have to go to the gas pump, and then you become aware that the way you drive your car has an impact on the environment. But when you use your smartphone, you have very little possibility to guess that it has an impact on the environment. So that's really the first step. And then second step is to explain some good practices which can have a positive impact. But I would say 50%, 60% of the solution of the impact will come from this communication campaign.
Okay, I think this now we are going to take the last questions because we are approaching the end of the session, and this is something that on methodologies, the questions on methodologies. One of our main difficulties is to identify reliable impact indicators ex ante and reference methodologies for systemic measurement, for example, for smart cities. Any ideas? And another one, a similar one, are there ready-to-use criteria to compare and select the best sustainable digital projects in public procurement or grants, like WLTP standards for cars? And
yeah, I think it's more or less the same question. I agree. It's a problem at the moment. Because even when you have the, let's say, the willingness to apply such, let's say, would call that environmental discipline onto digital transition projects, there are very little indicators and tools which are available to do that. So the two answers. One, in the report we published 10 days ago, there is a beginning of such a tool. And all the model we've built is completely public, and we hope it will inspire some companies that will then use it to provide, let's say, commercially available tools. The second thing which is necessary is to have a set of good data. What I mean is that we need to have a good level of confidence regarding what is the environmental impact of a smartphone, of a server, of a virtual reality headset, and so on and so on. And at the moment, there is no real public database that provides this information. And there is some effort conducted in France to build such kind of database, but it's clear that in my mind, these efforts would be even more valuable if it were to be conducted on a European basis, because basically all the devices we use in a European country use it in another country. Okay, so that really would be a subject where having a European approach would bring significant value added, and we should avoid duplicating efforts on this, and make sure that we have such a database available in the very short term. That means in 6 to 12 months and not in 3 years.
Thank you, Hugues. We have 4 minutes left, so let's use them. There is one more question. Is there any data on the impact of mass telework on the energy consumption in the digital field? And I will use my privilege as the moderator also to ask one question, coming back to your point on addictive design techniques. What are your thoughts on addressing that topic?
Could you repeat the first question? I'm not sure I got it completely.
Sorry, sure. It's data on the impact of mass telework on energy consumption. I suppose the question is whether the impact of digital is going to increase or decrease. Well, increase if we switch to mass telework.
Okay. Well, telework, yes, in principle, is going to be positive, to have a positive impact. However, all the studies, academic studies which have been conducted on it, show that the benefits are not as huge as expected. That means probably it can reduce the individual carbon footprint by 2%, maybe 5%, 10%. It's not going to reduce it by 50%. Why? Because there are some indirect impacts which are not always positive. There's also some risk of a rebound effect on some parts of the usage. But overall, yes, it's positives, and it's a bit like a smart project. It's not enough to say work to achieve what we're looking for. Probably we have to learn how to use telework in the right way in order to maximize these impacts. But overall, yes, it's a good way forward. Second question on addictive design. These techniques actually are known, and they should be limited, and if necessary, they should be limited through some regulations. And actually, that's one of the proposals from the French Senate to have that. As sometimes some kind of advertising techniques are forbidden, it could also be the way for part of these addictive design techniques. I hope you heard me, because the network is not so good at the moment.
Thank you, Hugues. Yes, at the end there was a bit of interruption. In any case, we are coming to an end of this session. So let me thank Hugues again very much for this presentation. Lots of food for thought, lots of data. and we look forward to your next reports. So thank you very much from me. I don't know if Andrea wants to say say anything. No, that's it. Okay, so the video will be put up on the webpage of the Connect University. And thank you all for watching. Thanks. Bye.